as we continue in our service, we're going to start a new focus in our sermons today and next week. So it'll be a 2-week focus on blessing, understanding what it means to be blessed. And, these sermons were planned quite a bit ahead of time before we knew that there was going to be a pandemic. But the fact that there is one makes this even more pertinent. And so, what is blessing? What does it mean to be blessed? When we think about what it means to be blessed, sometimes we think that, well, if good things are happening to us, then we're blessed. If life is going well, then we are blessed. But then, what does that mean when life is not going well? What does that mean for people who are suffering or having hardships? Does that mean that they're not blessed? Does that mean that they are somehow cursed by God? Sometimes we equate wealth and possessions with blessedness, but then what does that mean for the poor? Does that mean that they are not blessed? But yet we know that in the New Testament, Jesus says, blessed are the poor. What about where's the line? When are we considered blessed? If it's based on income, what level of income is considered blessed? And where is that line? Is it the same as the national poverty level? Or how do we define what that is? When are we technically blessed by God and when are we not? How do we know when we are singled out for punishment by God? We ask all these kinds of questions. If we don't ask them explicitly, then implicitly by what we believe we are asking these questions. We assume that life works a certain way. We assume that if we do certain things, we are going to be guaranteed certain things in life. And then when life doesn't go that way, we say, why me? Why me? Why is this happening to me? Why am I being singled out and punished? And so we're going to take a look at this subject of blessing and right along with it, the idea that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. So we know on one level that that's not true, but on another level we assume that it is true. So we're going to take a look at the Bible and what it has to say about this subject, and then also kind of what we think about today. So when we look at the Bible and what it says on this idea of blessing, we really get more than one opinion in the Bible, more than one voice on this, and that really shouldn't be a surprise. After all, the Bible is written by numerous people over a period of thousands of years. People's thinking over a period of thousands of years changes. And so not everybody in the Bible is necessarily going to completely agree with everyone else in the Bible. And when these documents that were put together in the Bible were decided, it wasn't that the people who put the Bible together didn't know this. They understood that there were authors and viewpoints that didn't agree with one another, and they were okay with that. But so we have two different opinions, generally speaking, in the Bible. The first one is what I would call the prevailing wisdom of the day. And the prevailing wisdom of the day was that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. The prevailing view was that life makes sense, and that there are certain things you can do to guarantee certain outcomes. And so if we look at the Bible, there are many instances where we can see this viewpoint on display. For instance, in the Old Testament, there are numerous stories about women who are unable to give birth to children. And so they are unable to conceive, and they are considered not necessarily cursed, but certainly not blessed. And then, oftentimes in the stories, they're able to have children, and it is said that they have been blessed by God to be able to have children. And so there's that idea that good things mean you're blessed, and a bad thing means you're not blessed. We see this with the patriarch Abraham in Genesis. Abraham is considered to be blessed, and one of the reasons why he was considered to be blessed is that he was pretty wealthy. He had a lot of livestock. He had just a lot of things in his life that he was considered blessed. We have in Deuteronomy, pretty much the whole book of Deuteronomy is operating under this assumption that if you follow God, talking to the Hebrew people, if you follow God in your land, then God will send rain and you will have good crops. But if you turn away from God and you follow other gods, then God will not send rain and your crops will suffer. And so it's that idea of life making sense. We do certain things to guarantee certain things. The book of Proverbs, you can find this in a lot of the Proverbs where it says, if you do this, then this will happen. This idea that if you just do the right things, then goodness will come. So we see it in a lot of places. We see it also in the New Testament, but more explicitly in the Old, but not exclusively so. But then you have another viewpoint in the Bible, and that is kind of butting up against that prevailing wisdom of the day. So, for instance, in Job really challenges that idea that bad things happen to bad people. Job was considered blessed. He had a lot of things. He had a large family, a lot of livestock, and then almost everything is taken away from him. And then after that, he has some friends who come and try to help him. And so they say, well, you must have done something wrong for this to happen, and so you need to repent of whatever it is, and then the bad things will stop happening. Job completely disagrees with this. He says, I haven't done anything to deserve this. And we typically, when we hear Job's friends or we read about it, we think, oh my goodness, how could they say those things? But how many of us have thought those things sometimes when people have bad things happen to them? How many of us have had those thoughts when we're honest? And really, his friends were just trying to help, using the prevailing wisdom of the day and the theology of Deuteronomy, and the idea that bad things must be happening to him because he'd done something to deserve it. But Job pushes back against that idea. Ecclesiastes is another book that pushes against that idea. The author of Ecclesiastes really pushes against the idea that life makes any sense at all, as he says that nothing makes sense in life. The righteous and the wicked, they all end up dead. The righteous oftentimes suffer, and the wicked oftentimes prosper and have long lives. And he says it doesn't make any difference. And none of this makes any sense. All of it is meaningless. I think if you read Ecclesiastes, you'll find that he must have been having a bad day, or a bad couple of days. But he really pushes back against that idea that life makes any sense at all. Then in the New Testament, we have Jesus pushing against that idea when he talks about a certain man who was born blind, and he asks his disciples, somebody asks him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of something he did or something his parents did? And Jesus says, basically, in my own words, he says, well, it wasn't because of anyone's sin that he was born blind, but God's going to get some glory out of this because Jesus was about to cure him and restore his sight. We also have Jesus, rather than considering people who are ill to be cursed, he reaches out and touches them and heals them and completely breaks the boundaries of what is considered pure and impure. Jesus teaches us to love our enemies as well as our friends, and he says, after all, God sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous, directly contradicting Deuteronomy, which says that God sends his rain on the righteous. So we have these two viewpoints, both included in our scriptures. Now today, for us, we generally, there's a part of us on one level that we know that life doesn't make sense all the time, and we know that bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, but on many levels, we operate under the implicit assumption that life should make sense, and that if something wrong is happening, it's because we deserve it. Right? We live under the assumption that if we just do the right things, we will be guaranteed certain things in life. If I just save a certain amount of money and invest a certain amount of money, I'm going to be financially secure. If I just eat right and exercise, I'm going to be healthy. Many people expect that they are going to live a good, long life and not have any health problems until about the time when they're ready to pass away. We have certain assumptions that we might not verbalize them, we might not explicitly say them, but implicitly we are assuming that that is going to be the case for us. And really it's an illusion. It is an illusion that we have that many people in developing countries don't have the luxury of living under. Many people in the developing world who deal with hardship and death and illness and sickness and poverty. They deal with these things on a daily basis, and so they don't live under such illusions that they have control. But it's in developed countries like our own that we have that sense of security, that sense of illusion that we are under control. And there's nothing like a pandemic to burst apart that illusion. Now, in many ways, you could say we are in more control than some areas of the world with our advancements in technology and medicine. We are shielded from a lot of the things that people deal with on a daily basis because they did not happen to be born in the same place that we were. But nonetheless, we are not in complete control. And so we think about these things, but when we have something happen to us, it doesn't have to be a pandemic that bursts apart that illusion. It could be losing a loved one. It could be that your family is falling apart. It could be that you've lost your job or you're furloughed. It could be that any number of things. You could receive a scary diagnosis. And when any of these things happen, we tend to ask, why me? Why me? And when we ask why me, what we are assuming there, what's under the surface of that question is, what did I do to deserve this? I consider myself a relatively decent person, so I don't feel like I've done anything to deserve what's happening to me, but nonetheless this is happening to me, and therefore there must be something that I've done to deserve this. So you ask, why me? What did I do to deserve this? So under this question of why me is the assumption that God is singling you out and punishing you because of the hardship that you're facing. It certainly may feel that way. And so we think those things, but this is assuming also that life makes sense and that it works a certain way. But I would like to challenge you to ask a different question, and that is, why not me? Why not me is very different than why me. When we ask why not me, we're saying, why should I be exempt from the suffering and the hardship and the difficulty and the health problems and the death that so many people in the world are dealing with all the time? Why should I be guaranteed a long life when many people die young? Why should I be guaranteed to be healthy when so many people are sick? Why should I be guaranteed financial security when some people will never be? And I don't say those things to say that those things are bad, because they're not, right? I want to be financially secure. I want to live a long life. I want to be healthy. I want all of those things. And so I'm going to do the things that I can do to try to make that happen. And there are good practices that can make it more likely that those things will happen. Saving money and investing money makes it more likely that you will be financially secure. But people who are retiring this year know that it doesn't guarantee that those things will happen. And that's a big difference between something being likely and something being guaranteed. It's a difference of control. And we realize in times like this that we are not under complete control. But asking why me versus why not me is more profound than we realize. Because whereas when we ask why me, we are assuming that we're being punished by God. When we say why not me, we're not assuming that we're being punished by God. Instead, we're acknowledging that sometimes life just doesn't make sense. And that everybody has problems. They're different, although really we have something in common now. But we all have different problems, but we still all have problems. None of us are exempt from the things of the world. And so the idea of why me assumes punishment. The idea of why not me assumes that this is just a reality that we live in this world and we are not exempt from it. Why me assumes certain things. For instance, lately on social media, I've seen things that say something to this effect. All of this wild weather that we've been having, tornadoes, massive floods, fires, and now the pandemic, I think that God is trying to send us a message loud and clear that we need to return to Him. So that's the message that we've been hearing, or at least I've seen every now and then in social media. Now, a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, many people who are dying are followers of Jesus, and I hate group punishments. I always hated that in school when the whole class would be punished because a couple of people were doing something wrong. I always hated that, and I'd hate to think that God is like that God gives out group punishments where the innocent get caught in the crosshairs. That's number one. Number two, if God has to send a pandemic to throw a tantrum in order to get our attention to maybe help us to do what He wants us to do, then God has lost the battle. God has lost control. Any parenting expert will tell you that if you have to yell at your children and throw an adult tantrum to get them to do what you want them to do, then you have lost control of the situation. And who of us hasn't done that at one time or another? But that when we do, we've lost control of the situation. And we've lost the battle. And in the same way, if God has to throw a temper tantrum in order to get His message across to us, He has lost the argument. He has lost control of the situation. And He's not worthy of our respect. Fortunately, I don't believe that God works that way. I don't believe that God sends those things as punishments to us. And that's why asking the question, why not me, is so profound. And that question is not meant to make light of the things that are happening. It is not meant to depress us and say, well, there's nothing we can do, because there are certainly things that we can do to help in any situation. But it simply acknowledges that sometimes life doesn't make sense. Not everything that happens is because God is punishing us or because of any particular divine reason, but sometimes bad things happen. It is a part of our life, and it asks the question, it assumes that we are not exempt from those things. We just got through the season of Lent, in which we have been talking about the human side of Jesus and many of the hardships that Jesus faced. My goodness, if Jesus' life was as difficult and hard as we were talking about throughout Lent, what makes me think that my life should be better? Or what makes me think, let's put it that way, what makes me think that I should be excluded from those things that Jesus faced and many of the things that other people face on a daily basis? And so it's really complicated when we talk about blessing and what it means to be blessed. To say that just because things are going well for me, just because I am doing well, that means I am blessed. Because then I have to ask the question, well, then does that mean others are not blessed if things are not going well for them? And so we have to think about those things, and we have to be careful about how we talk about things, especially when we talk about blessing. The fact is that God sends blessings, if you want to call them blessings, God sends good things to all of us, the righteous and the unrighteous. We are all blessed. We are all blessed with the love of God because God loves us and God seeks after us even if we are running away from Him. And so when we ask, why not me? We are acknowledging the fact that suffering is very real, that hardships are very real, and that none of us are necessarily excluded from them. And it helps us to acknowledge that we are not in control of everything, and therefore we must place our trust in God. You see, faith doesn't really do a great job of answering the question of why certain things happen. No religion does. I haven't found a religion that really gives a good answer to that question of why bad things happen, including Christianity. And you won't even find, even in the Bible, you're not going to find one single satisfactory answer, an open and shut case for why bad things happen to good people. Faith, the function of faith is not to answer why bad things happen. Faith is not meant to shield us or to keep us away from experiencing the bad things of life. Studying the life of Jesus, studying the life of pretty much all of the disciples who followed him, studying the lives of Christians throughout church history will tell you that there has never been a time in history where faith promises us a carefree life where everything goes well. Sometimes we think that way, but faith does not promise that we will always be shielded from hard times, and it doesn't answer the question of why there are hard times. What it does is it helps us to get through those hard times, no matter what may happen in the end, whether we survive them or whether we do not survive them and we end up passing on to the next life. God is always with us, and our faith will see us through. That's what made Christians, particularly in the first few centuries of the Christian faith, that's what made Christians so inspiring. People didn't look at Christians and say, well, look at all the wonderful things that happened to them. Look at those Christians over there. Life is going so well for them. They have no problems. They seem not to be suffering. We should all become Christians. No, that's not what people were saying. People could look at Christians and they could say that they were suffering. Oftentimes, Christians would suffer more because they had faith in Jesus, whereas they could have avoided some of their suffering without it. No, people were under no illusion that the Christians had better lives, meaning that they avoided suffering. Now, instead, people would look at Christians and they would say, first of all, they would say, look at how they love one another. Look at how they take care of the people who are suffering. Look at how they look after the vulnerable in society. Look at how they look after the widows and the orphans, people who have no safety nets. Look at how they care for one another in their suffering. And many of the inspiring stories of the Christian faith are not about people avoiding suffering. It's about how people continue to live in the midst of and through their suffering because of the power of their faith and their belief that God was with them and that God was greater than any suffering and any hardship that the world could bring them. And so that is the faith that we have inherited. A faith that says that no matter what happens, no matter what may come, our faith will carry us through. Thanks be to God. Amen.